Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. I've had some great founder stories in the last few weeks on the podcast, and this week we do something slightly different, looking at particularly in terms of Hardtech from a VC perspective, as I welcome to the episode Malin Carlstrom, who's partner at Climentum Capital. Malin, great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, David. Nice to be here.
Good. So where are you about seeing the world at the moment? You've got offices in Stockholm, Berlin, and Amsterdam, I believe. Is that right?
Stockholm, Berlin, and Copenhagen.
And Copenhagen.
So it's a Danish fund. Yeah, it's a Danish fund. I'm based out of Stockholm. I have one partner, Dusty. She's based out of Berlin. And then we are two guys in Copenhagen.
Okay, very good. It's a little while since I was last in Stockholm. It was very snowy at the time, but look forward to coming back at some point. So one thing I was really keen to talk about when we first, were introduced is the view of Climentum in terms of looking at and investing in hard tech companies, still within clean tech, but the hard, in terms of technology and product and stuff, which is not entirely unique, but it's certainly not the norm, I guess, in the VC world at the moment. So perhaps you could start with sharing a little bit before we talk about you and your background, just a very quick synopsis of what Climentum is all about in terms of how and where and what type of companies you scout and invest in.
Yeah, definitely. So we launched approximately 2 years ago now. And we're an Article 9 fund. It's a so-called dark green fund.
Right.
We're a climatetech fund, not a clean tech, not an impact fund. We have one KPI, and that's CO2 abatement.
Okay.
So it's very much focused on climate. And as you know, David, the climate issue is an atom problem, right? It's not an electron problem. So when we do our life cycle analysis, when we appreciate the potential of CO2 abatement for a certain market and a certain company, then we realize with these life cycle analysis that in order to achieve scale, you need also to reach scale of implementation. So actual implementation in the real world, and that with atoms. So it's steel, it's bolts, it's infrastructure stuff. And that's why we end up being finding a lot of portfolio companies in the hard tech space. Right. So we tend to talk about having, very concrete hardware components, but augmented by software.
Yeah.
So of course, when we have this, we have a heat pump company, and that is, of course, with software features connected to spot prices and the grid and so forth, right? So it can be steered and optimized in a way. So that is usually what we see, and that's why we end up there. You're right that the heritage in venture, specifically, I would say Swedish and Nordic venture, comes from the software side, consumer focused companies such as Spotify and Klarna and King and all of these guys. But I think that the potential for seeing unicorns in the hard tech space is increasing. Yeah. And also that the industry with all its capex and actual installations, you have a massive opportunity there when these companies don't want buy an app for the nice to have, but they have to install. It's a must have, right? To comply with all these climate regulations and such. So that's why we end up with such a portfolio of companies. Yeah.
Okay. It'd be good to dig further into that abatement side of things. And there are, of course, some very high-profile Swedish companies like Northvolt and Green Steel who've had a lot of attention and a lot of money in the recent past. Tell us a little bit how that works then, because again, historically, VC, I won't say it's always impatient, but it's not necessarily the most patient capital in terms of looking at investment growth and exit. Now, hard tech and certainly sort of carbon abatement is tough work and typically requires relatively deep pockets and a little bit of patience. And perhaps you can share a little bit of your view on that side of things in terms of the investment thesis of how long you anticipate staying with organizations, what sort of follow-ons you do. So essentially how you manage to work in that sort of more difficult funding environment.
Yeah, you're right. I was previously with ABB, so I know from the inside the sales cycles and how to sell to corporates. It takes a lot of time. And you need to acknowledge that and have respect for that. But at the same time, so what we do, we tend to focus on companies with a higher TRL. So they have been in the maybe they are in the pilot phase or later, but not earlier. So we do take on technology risk, but we focus more on the market risk and the commercial one. Mm-hmm. So all the time that has been consumed up until a TRL level of 7 or above, that's where we don't invest, and then we appreciate that it might take 5, 7, 10 years to achieve on the commercial side what the company sets out to do. So that's how we try to mitigate that challenge. Okay. We also know that in order to execute and being some kind of an early stage venture infrastructure play, you need to understand and control the financing aspects of things. So first of a kind plants, debt financing, project financing, working capital and such. We place a lot of emphasis on recruiting the right CFOs. Right. And understand whether the management team understands this ecosystem. So you have the technical side, but you definitely also have the financial side in this. So that's also how we evaluate these startups and the teams. Our teams tend to be a bit older. So in configuration, that may be comparison to software plays. And also that they have factual and actual background from the industry. It might not be the industry that they are in now, but they have usually the experience, right, from within corporates, and knowing how these sales processes work, that you understand on which level you need to get in order to get the right type of discussions and price negotiations and stuff.
There's someone who I think I founded my first business in my just turned 40, so it's always music to my ears that not everybody is 22 when they found the business. But on a serious note,
I think the average is 45 of a successful entrepreneur, actually.
Yeah. Well, the Hyperion turns 10 this month, so it's going well so far. But no, on a serious note, it's good that you talk a little bit about the there's various elements. Of course, there's the technology, the TRL level you've discussed there. Clearly, there's at least some semblance of product market fit, pilot stage and beyond. But looking at the team, because that's one of the I guess the areas where we enjoy working is either with the VCs we support or directly with the founders is. Again, having that right balance of experience and grey hairs sometimes in the room that means that your investment is as safe as it can be.
Yeah, it's never safe, right? That's part of the definition of venture, more or less. Yeah, the odds are against you. Yeah. But I think you need to be impressed, and you need to invest in founders that know a lot more than you do. And that goes especially, I think, on the finance side. So the team has to be kind of big and complete. Okay. Because it's so many critical points. You're right that you need to have the technical component. In some of these cases and some of these companies, it's less about a unique proprietary technology. It's more about maybe assembly, creating production lines, building factories and stuff like this. And then you have how to build teams, large teams, on an international scale. How to warehouse, how to source, all of this stuff. And that requires kind of from the start more people, more heads. And more competence. It's a more diverse need for competence, I think, that it might be in a software play. Yeah,
across the team. Interesting thought often comes up when I'm speaking to VCs, Malin, is around the sort of the solo founder versus co-founder scenario. Have you particular thoughts on that, or looking at your portfolio? Is there a blend of that, or do you tend to invest more where there are co-founders, as you said, are more of a sort of a broad skill set within the team?
So in some of these companies, we really have prodigies, I would say. So super intelligent founders, and they are usually technical inventors. Yeah. But they surround themselves. So they are senior enough, I think, and have integrity enough to realize that they need to be complemented on such many different aspects. Yeah. So we tend to have bigger founding teams. And we have not yet. I think the smallest founding team we've invested in are 2 people. Okay. It's still a very small team, that company. Yeah. And those guys are very seasoned in their market, and they are, I think, very multifaceted. That is also a company that does not imply a technical component. So it's more about handling all these, as I said, complex financial modeling and setting up these structures and how to navigate in the political and risk landscape. But when you have technical, you do have the inventor usually and the founder. But then you also have the CFO. You have might be a CEO, so the founder might not be the CEO anymore. And then you have marketing and all of this surrounding. So that's usually how it looks. It's usually larger teams. Yeah.
Slightly larger teams. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your background, how you came to be. You say obviously Climentum is a relatively young fund. Perhaps you could just share a little bit of your background in terms of what brought you to have this passion and to have this this current sort of investment thesis and this current role with Climentum. What was that led you to this path? Yeah,
so I actually started studying energy and environmental technology back in the late 90s. So I was one of the first generations to actually study this. We actually built a website in 1998. 26 years ago, where you could calculate your carbon footprint. So we were very early out. And then I studied energy technology for 6 years, took an MBA, and then via a trainee program at the big Swedish Nordic bank, SEB, Merchant Banking, I ended up with the bank's venture division. And that was in 2005. So we were approaching 2 decades of investing because I've been in this industry since. I think it felt home for me because I think as a venture investor, it's important to have financial insight and background, but even more important to have technical one. And I think you need to be a technophile to love technology, especially when you work in Hardtech and deeptech stuff. I think you need to have a very big trust in technology being maybe the savior of climate issues. And an understanding for the engineering and a respect for that. And that is how I feel. I also have a very strong, commitment to reindustrialize Europe. I want to see Europe succeed in developing and owning technology, keeping it here, the patents, the universities, creating the jobs. So all this B2B focus, I think, was propelled by my position with ABB.
Right.
And also with my background as an engineer, and my father is an engineer and so forth. So I think the climate aspect of it just brings it all together. It's industry, it's infrastructure, it's deep tech, it's research on a very, deep theme that will probably consume, our reality for the coming decades. And then, nearshoring again, having respect for geopolitical issues as well, which I fear might worsen going ahead as well. Yeah. So this nearshoring and bringing back industry, a relevant industry and future-proof industry to Europe is what I am keen on doing. So I'm much more leaning into that than consumer-based stuff.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was talking to, I don't know if you're Gerard Reed from Alexa Capital recently on an event around geopolitics and how that is potentially at least one of the bigger threats, because we all know that technology will evolve, but essentially we have more or less the tools to crack the nut that we need to crack. There's obviously policy, there's financing, there's funding, there's people from our perspective, but the geopolitics is sometimes something you feel is slightly out of control. But we have seen, for good and for bad, I think generally for good, this nearshoring and this commitment from the European Union to make sure there's a greater emphasis on local content across some of these technologies. What obviously you've been, as you say, 2 decades in this investment environment and more so in this sort of engineering, hard tech, deep tech more recently. What have you seen perhaps that gives you the most cause for optimism across that sort of geopolitics, the funding regime? We know it's a little bit lighter at the moment generally than it has been, but it's still, the tailwinds are very positive in that regard. But I guess some of the other factors which are pointing towards companies like the ones you invest in having the best possible opportunity to succeed.
I think climate tech is reaching a maturity in so many ways. The technology is maturing, so it makes for a financially sound business and not subsidy driven. So, that's why it's interesting this time around. Even the likes of Google, right, failed with these hype cycles we had in clean tech, for the past maybe 1-2 decades, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're in the money now more than we have been before. That makes me quite optimistic. There is a realization, of course. So there is a lot of pressure from different players in the ecosystem, the politics, the institutions, the entrepreneurs nonetheless, right? So the actual brains inventing stuff is dedicating their time and effort on this notion. So, that's, I think, talks in favor of stuff happening.
Yeah.
And then, also it might be, these tensions, the geopolitical ones. I heard this investor colleague, he also said that there is different focus in different parts of the world on, what kind of technology are you putting your money on?
Yeah.
Also, it could be abating this, or it could be handling the actual, so more of a, okay, this is actually going to happen. We will have these negative climate effects.
Yep.
So I will invest rather in stuff that will help me, live through it rather than abate it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a negative and more depressing
it's a little bit
view on it.
Yeah, no, it's quite funny. We had a podcast with a guy called Ulrich Seitz, who was formerly with Bevar Ventures, I think 9 months ago, talking about the adaptation word. And at that time, and still to an extent, people were fearful of talking about adaptation because it almost was like a signal of surrender to some extent that we can't. And it seems hopefully that there's an acceptance now that we still fight the fight, but we also have to adapt or be prepared for adaptation. And it's good that you mentioned and recognize that because that's a good opportunity. Again, obviously it's important that we do as a society learn to adapt to what's coming because it is coming. But also obviously from a financial perspective, there's an opportunity there to make sure that there are good businesses and sound businesses that benefit and regenerate funds and solve some of these problems.
Exactly, and it might be how do you say, at a transition period, right? Or it might not be. I mean, take for instance, with climate change comes these it's more extreme weather phenomenon. So I was looking at a vertical farming company the other day, for instance, growing crops indoors, which makes sense from a macro perspective, even though it's been also hype in that segment.
Yeah.
The underlying trend is still there, right? And it's accelerating. Water accessibility, another one, right? So, it's always these questions about timing, but these technologies are, trying to handle climate change, but they can also, in the longer term, abate, right? So vertical farming could be, seen as both, I guess. That's just one example. Yeah,
interesting. I was speaking with a vertical farming company last week looking for investments. We'll pick that up with you afterwards. So let's talk a little bit again around that, I guess from your perspective, what you are looking for, even within sort of hard tech. There's a range of different technology. You touched on heat pumps on one side. We've just touched on potentially vertical farming. Perhaps you can share a little bit of some of the companies in your portfolio. Always reluctant to ask which is your favorite because it's like choosing the favorite child, but maybe from the portfolio, 1 or 2 examples of the types of companies you've invested in.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess one of my favorites is kind of an outlier because it's a very low TRL. But that's because in this entire market, there are just lower TRL companies. And that's our fusion investment. Right. Novatron. So it's kind of a novel approach to how to confine and keep the plasma stable. So in order to reach fusion, you need to reach the so-called triple point, which means enough temperature. We have done that. Enough density in the plasma, we have done that, but we also need time for the collisions of these molecules to actually happen. And that has not yet been achieved. So the plasma wants to dissipate, and all of these different technologies around the world with tokamaks, accelerators, and lasers are inherently unstable. So coming from a near field technology, applying his magnetic insights into the fusion space, we've come with up with a different design, which is completely novel and proprietary. So that's super interesting. So that's why it's the biggest addressable market you can actually get yourself into. Of course, highest risk as well, but then highest reward.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's a fascinating space. We had First Light Fusion on the podcast not so long ago, and again, there are some other, as in your own example, companies in this space. And like you say, if you get that right, clearly it's game changing, literally in every sense. Okay, cool.
Yes.
And perhaps any other sort of other examples of the types of companies and environments in which you invest?
Yeah. We have, as I previously mentioned, the heat pump company, which is the most mature one. So I would say that the TRL9 for years back, and they are more of Quantum, they are called. They have when we started, they had this one factory, and then they built a second one with 10x production capacity, and then during our holding period, the third one with an additional 10x. So that would be like the largest heat pump factory in Europe.
Is that industrial
Hungary?
Or domestic, by the way? Residential or industrial? Is it industrial or residential heat pumps?
Residential, yes,
okay.
Residential. They also have one of the smallest heat pumps in the world. So you can place it underneath your sink and replace a gas boiler. So the idea is single family households, yes, but also in multi-family homes in rural areas. So trying to replace the gas boiler. So it's kind of, they do have a wider array of products. So everything from larger size installations down to these very small ones. So that's also a very, very interesting company. I know that the regulations have been a bit delayed, but I think that the macro trend for heat pumps is just, it's just going to happen.
Absolutely. In my former solar business, we did actually become accredited and started installing solar heat pumps, and that was again about 15 years ago. But just in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a much more I guess an acceptance and a drive towards it. Maybe even to some extent driven by the energy crisis caused by Ukraine and all. But there certainly seems to be much more.
Yeah, so it's political because we need to get away from the fossil fuels, and then it's also driven by when do the electricity prices and the gas prices meet for it to make sense, right? Because you have such a higher capacity and the efficiency grade from the heat pump, but the electricity price is still a bit too high, if you want, compared to the gas price in some markets. That's why it's delaying a bit, but I think in the long term, we're going to see that happen. That's just my conviction.
Absolutely.
So those are 2 examples. And then we have, we are also an Article 9 fund that actually appreciates nuclear. It's also fission. So we see nuclear and fission as an integral part to reach net zero. Nuclear is one of the few, proven technologies that can actually help us, reduce CO2 on scale. So we have invested in a SMR project developer based out of Sweden. Yeah.
Was it? I think Eon had some troubles, as many have, but it just proves that it's tough markets. But again, if you get those things right, that's the significance, I guess, of investing as you do at that kind of type of organization and type of stage of development. We can obviously point, and we will point people to your website so they can see perhaps more of the portfolio. Perhaps it'd be interesting, Malin, to explore a little bit of, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs and founders who listen to the podcast. If you are an inventor and/or entrepreneur with a Hardtech or a deeptech type of product, what would you advise them to do as they embark on their initial sort of look at fundraising, not just with yourselves, but generally as they approach fundraising to move things forward? Or any particular bits of advice or suggestions in terms of how they should go about that?
Yeah, I guess it's back to the basics. Does it make financial sense? Your invention, for whom is it a must-have? and not for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Not every single size fits all. So figure out, where, this target customer, not market, but actual customer is. Mind your cap table. It's fairly easy to do just a simple Excel model and see what happens in the different financing stages with your ownership.
Right.
Also, bring on the money with the people you like, because once you have investors on board, you don't get rid of them, right?
Yep.
So you need to handle them. So I think that's very crucial that you have, board members you can exchange, your team members you can exchange, but your cap table and your owners, harder, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very important that people understand this. And maybe that, as well as we would like to get to know our founders and potential investments over time, I think that the founders should get to know their potential investors over time.
Yeah.
Having dialogues, not for just a couple of months, but maybe half a year or a year, and so I would be cautious on that and understand, okay, your growth journey for multiple sequential rounds. I also think that from start, especially with deep tech founders, mind your soft funding strategy. Understand that landscape and have that as a part of your strategy from start to access soft funding.
Right. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of companies that should be doing this, but they are not. Sometimes they feel it's too small money or it's too admin for them, but it's actually non-dilutive capital, and it also yields a lot of respect once you get it and so forth. And one smaller funding can yield, access to larger. So I think that's very important too.
Yeah, the credibility factor from that.
Yeah. And then your patent situation in Sweden, if you're a scientist at a university, it's not the property of the university, your patent. It's actually yours, That's not the case in many other countries. So how to negotiate, if you want, with the university, how to get access to see that the company actually owns its IP, and that is figured out quite early on. Because if you grow and it shows to be successful and you get larger funding and it's still a bit unsolved, it can get very messy and or expensive for you unnecessarily. So that's also one thing. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a lot of that about preparation of thinking in thinking deeply, essentially, rather than again just chasing the first investment. Particularly that thought about the cap table, because like you said, a lot of founders get fixated on a raise for in a relatively short term. This gets us to be able to why, but like you say, it's kind of once you've made that leap, you're stuck with those people, and also you lose control of your company to a large. That's part of the nature of the funding, right? You lose an element of control, and you've got to be prepared for that, as well as the fact that you choose your partners wisely, because they're with you for the journey.
Exactly, and of course, you're financing yourself where to, right? You probably have some kind of milestones that you want to achieve. And that's also important to understand, can this funding actually get me to another state, right? To another position where I can motivate a higher value, I can attract other people, I can attract the more money and so forth. And if you have, with deep tech, as we said in the beginning, it takes a lot of time and there is a lot of hinders along the way. Stuff happens all the time. Do you have the right kind of investors that understand this, that are prepared to bridge you, right? On okay terms, for instance? You need to lay that kind of bed for you, so it doesn't just being cut off if you don't by a certain date reach certain milestones.
Yeah. It's not always easy to give time to these thoughts when there's a million. As a founder, of course, there's always a million things going on that you need to be working on or solving. But it takes. I think you just sort of reiterated the point. It's worth taking the time out to think these things through, because at some point they might come back and bite you if you've gone on to these things lightly.
Definitely. And you want to do it because it's fun, right? So then you need to have fun people around you.
Right.
You can't have the people that you don't agree with, around you. It's hard enough as it is. So I think that's very important.
Talk about that. You touched on this earlier on in terms of obviously founding teams or sort of the founding teams, but also about surrounding yourself from all aspects, of course, with your potential investors, but with people who are able to support and offer value to you. So in terms of board advisors or non-exec director type of roles, do you encourage or look for organizations or founders who've been wise enough to seek that kind of insight and mentoring from established people?
Yeah, yes. Of course, if it's with the relevant individuals working for the company, it of course gives you a higher, chance of succeeding because you will move faster and move in a more relevant way, might be. So definitely, and choose not based on names, because usually the high profile names have so much to fill their time with, right? So why would they be out, promoting your company? I've seen that before, that bigger names are sometimes giving less value to the actual company because they have so much other things and other companies that they, promote and address their time to. So rather have someone that is very dedicated, maybe someone who has invested as well, just a smaller amount, that actually runs your business for you. I think that's more important than having the big famous name. And also work with, the board is actually a power position in the company, but your network and your advisors, you can exchange. It's more of a loose relationship, and you can exchange and you can broaden. So putting a lot of people in there, they could also be investors, but they don't necessarily have to be part of the board.
Yeah.
And that might also be what a lot of people want, that they don't want to have the actual, legal responsibility for the company, but still engage. So I think those people are also very valuable. So being in kind of an advisory network type setup.
Yeah, invaluable. But once again, actually time to think about not just jumping at the first available person or high profile person, but giving some insight or thought into what it is you want to get from them from a value perspective.
Exactly. And I appreciate people that offer in the board very concrete, value, or as an advisor, not talking about large, wise words, more being very concrete on people that might be recommended, by access to potential customers, by, technical advice, whatever it might be, having the concrete value add, not these old senior wise words, No. So I'm much more into that concrete stuff, and that's also what we try to do.
Yeah,
we try to give concrete help.
Touched on a few areas, Malin, in that you're interested in, and where you've already made sort of some investments. But taking a bit, I guess, a step back outside of particularly your fund, but just generally looking at the deep tech environment, climate tech environment, what areas of technology are the ones where you're most interested, or where you see, from your own perspective, most hope of making some breakthroughs?
So again, we're looking at these highest emitting sectors, and where we really can move the needle. We have done one investment also in a memory compression and handling company for applications mainly in data centers, because we see that with the AI, and of course AI is something that we discuss internally as well. So I think investing in stuff adjacent to this field, not necessarily the AI itself. I think that, and I've thought so for a long time, back in the days, I thought that the internet is very monopolistic, right? You have one search engine, you have one social network, you have one music player, and so forth. And with AI, I feel it's even more so. So you're going to have a few handful of players here. And the bigger, you had the network effect before on the consumer side, and here you have the data effect and the training effect. So placing AI bets, I have all the respect for investors that do that. We shy away a bit from that. We want to see companies utilizing AI, but not having some kind of an AI model as a secret sauce. So again, coming back to the hardware component of things, having that as a moat, and not the unique new AI feature, right?
Yeah.
We won't bet on that. So that's one thing. That this macro trend of AI is one thing, and see what surrounds that from a climate tech perspective. That's one example.
Yeah.
And then we have all these transportation. Of course, we've shied away a bit from it because we've seen so much hyped valuations in the EV sector and the charging sector, and that's not for us. We are not FOMO driven. And then the energy production and the energy grid sector, of course, with all these virtual networks, the renewables, which puts a lot of pressure on the frequency handling, and the need for more baseload power. That's very interesting, we feel. Okay. You have fusion and fission, you might have wave power, you have, I think that baseload power is in this hard to abate sectors is crucial.
Yeah, in fact, I think when I was in Stockholm last, I was with Baseload Power, actually, the geothermal investor, again, looking at moving towards baseload from geothermal
exactly.
areas.
Exactly. Cool. I mean, so we need those. I mean, hydro cannot be built out anymore. So we need to, new baseload power solutions being implemented on a larger scale. And then ag tech, as I mentioned before, and also the biotech surrounding that, making plants more sustainable and using less pesticides and stuff like this. It's very wide. We acknowledge that, the climate tech scene and the investment, landscape here. But I think what's important is to look at the macro trends and seeing also technology advancements with sensors and AI capabilities and new batteries and stuff like this. And then you have applications for all of this. So the technology advancement applications can be then in agri-tech or in energy or in storage or in distribution or whatever it might be. That's how we see it, with appliance.
Yeah, sometimes a single technology tipping point or a cost tipping point or even political tipping points can suddenly unleash other opportunities that come from that initial sort of smaller area, I guess. And that's one thing that's quite interesting. We talked about before energy prices or gas electricity prices. Certain when things balance and tip, then suddenly technologies have their day, so to speak. So it's always fascinating to see how that evolves.
Yeah, and that's also, I think that the players in this field and the climate is looking increasingly towards the unit economics, because it has to make financial sense this time around. It cannot be subsidy driven. It's the same with us. We do have potential for massive carbon credits from a lot of these companies that we've invested in and that we're looking at, but we never calculate with that. Right. So that's a cherry on the top potential, but nothing we want to see in a budget.
Okay.
So we want to see the company being able to, achieve a nice projection and a business without
sustainable business. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. It's been great to spend some time with you, Malin. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. We'll point the audience to your various social media channels and websites so they can find out some more. But it's really good to get a perspective of someone who's focused on and invested in some of the harder stuff to do from a VC perspective. So thanks for sharing that, and obviously look forward to seeing more of your successes along the way. But for now, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much.